Emma Carter had learned, early on, that silence was not the absence of something. It was a presence. It had weight, texture, temperature. It pressed against the skin differently depending on the room, cool in a library, warm in a bedroom just before sleep, and heavy, almost unbearably heavy, in a restaurant full of strangers on a Tuesday evening. She arrived at Crestwood Bistro at 6:50. 10 minutes early, because she always needed 10 minutes to situate herself before another person arrived. She needed to find the right table corner, against the wall, where she could watch the entrance and see faces clearly. She needed to tell the server, in her careful way, with the small card she kept in the front pocket of her bag, "I am deaf. Please face me when you speak. Written notes are welcome." She needed a moment to breathe before the performance began. Not that she thought of her life as a performance, exactly. But every new person required a kind of script, a careful calibration. How much to explain? How much to let slide? Whether to launch immediately into the context of her deafness or wait and let it surface naturally, which almost never went well. She was 31 years old, with amber hair that she kept loose, and a habit of pressing her thumbnail into the soft flesh of her palm when she was nervous, a private anchor, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking closely. She made her living as a freelance illustrator, working from a studio apartment on the 4th floor of a building on Hartwell Street. The apartment had good northern light and very thin walls, but the thin walls had never bothered her for obvious reasons. She drew children's book illustrations, botanical prints, occasional editorial work. Her hands were rarely still. Even in conversation, even in silence, her fingers moved, sketching invisible outlines against her thigh, tracing the grain of whatever surface they happened to rest on. She had been deaf since the age of 4. When a bout of bacterial meningitis had taken her hearing in a matter of days, she had no real memory of sound, not of her mother's voice, not of music, not of rain. What she had was the world as it had always been to her, a place of extraordinary visual detail, of texture and light, of faces that told you everything if you knew how to read them. She knew how to read them. She had been reading them her whole life. The date had been arranged through a mutual acquaintance. A woman named Bridget, who worked at the gallery that sometimes showed Emma's prints. The man's name was Jason Whitfield, 34, an architect, recently divorced. Bridget had described him as thoughtful and patient. Emma had prepared herself carefully, rehearsed a few conversation openers on paper, charged her phone so she could type quickly if needed, worn her dark green dress because she felt most herself in it. She sat at the corner table and watched the door. Jason arrived at 7:04. He was taller than she'd expected, with a narrow face and a very slight tension around his jaw that she noticed immediately and then deliberately chose not to read into. He spotted her, and his face arranged itself into the particular smile people used when they were trying to signal that they were perfectly comfortable with something they were not perfectly comfortable with. She smiled back, and they shook hands. The first 15 minutes were fine, in the way that first 15 minutes often were the bright, careful stretch of time before the awkwardness arrived. He had clearly done some research. He typed on his phone when she missed something, passed it across the table. He spoke slowly without making it obvious that he was speaking slowly. He asked about her illustration work and seemed genuinely interested in her answer, leaning forward slightly, watching her face. She thought, maybe. She thought, this might work, but she had thought that before. And she had learned that thinking it too early was a kind of self-harm. The cracks appeared around the 20-minute mark. A question she couldn't catch because the man at the neighboring table had leaned into her sight line at the wrong moment. She gestured, "I missed that," and Jason repeated himself, and she caught most of it but not the end. She shook her head apologetically. He typed it out, but his fingers moved faster now. A small, clipped irritation leaking into the motion that he probably didn't know was visible. She typed back her answer. He read it and nodded, set the phone down. There was a lag in the conversation then. A pause that in spoken exchange would have been filled easily, naturally, with a throwaway phrase or a laugh. In their particular back and forth, it simply widened, a crack in ice spreading without noise. She asked him, typing, about a project he'd mentioned earlier, a renovation near the waterfront. His face lit up for a moment, and she thought, "Here it is, the thing that will save this." He began describing it, and she watched his lips carefully, catching words, stitching them together, original and structure, and the light in the afternoons is, and then his phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced at it reflexively, a gesture so small and so human that she couldn't even blame him for it. And she lost the thread entirely. She put her hand up, gently. "I lost you." He looked at her. Just for a moment, just for the breath of a breath, she saw something pass across his face. Not cruelty. Nothing as simple as cruelty. It was the expression of a man encountering the full weight of something he had told himself would be lighter than it was. She had seen that expression before. She could have drawn it from memory. He picked up his phone, typed. "This is really hard." She nodded. She typed back, "I know, I'm sorry." He looked at what she'd written. Set the phone down again. Picked up his water glass. Turned it in his hands. "It's just a lot of work," he said. She caught it all this time. Every word. He stayed another 3 minutes, during which neither of them typed anything. Then he said he needed to make a call, excused himself, and did not come back. She watched him pass the window outside. He was already on his phone, walking quickly, his shoulders released from the particular brace of effort. He looked lighter. She watched that too. The server, a young woman with a dark braid and quick, kind eyes, came to check on her. Emma showed her card. The woman nodded and wrote on her notepad, "Can I get you anything?" Emma shook her head. Then changed her mind and pointed to the water, already on the table, mostly untouched. The server filled it and left. Emma stared at the glass. She had not moved since Jason left. She was aware that the restaurant was full around her. She could see it. The particular energy of a Tuesday dinner crowd, tables of couples and colleagues and friends, wine being poured, hands gesturing in the universal language of people who have things to say to one another. The warmth of the room reached her as pure visual information. The amber light, the softened faces, the easy lean of bodies toward one another across tables. She was sitting at the edge of all of it, and she was absolutely alone, and that was fine.